Welcome out to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield talking to some of the world's biggest stars, some of my favourite people and hysterical people as well, like Neil Mullarkey. How are you?
All right, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. Do you know, I've been looking up what you do, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Because you seem to be making more money, making funny serious, by encouraging people to communicate better through humour. It's stunning what you've achieved, really, isn't it?
Well, you're very kind, but how dare you imply I'm making money? What I found is that I'm making a difference, and I love it. I really love introducing people to the world of improvisational theatre, or improv as I call it, which actually started in the 1920s, helping children in Chicago to become more confident with their communication, really. And then it was a woman called Viola Spolin, a social worker, and it was her son who kind of said, oh gosh, this really works as an entertainment, and created what became Second City Theatre Company. And so I met Mike Myers many years later from Second City in Toronto. And so I really love it. It's a good combo for me because it's funny, it's entertaining, but it's also using a part of my brain that helped me get a degree in economics and social science, which is about how do people work, how do organizations work, how do we operate in groups, all the stuff that's going on beneath the surface, how you become more creative. And so, yes, you're very kind to say it's stunning, because I think so too. But there are people doing it around the world. There's a whole applied improv network.
Right.
People using this stuff to help people communicate better, create better, work better, etc.
I just left the BBC after 15 years, and my conclusions are that these corporations are full of people who talk in tongues, don't necessarily make sense, use as many euphemisms as they can not to say what they're trying to say. Is the corporate world getting worse for that?
Yes and no. I think you're talking about words like synergy, alignment, leverage,
yes,
cascade, and so forth. Those words are still there, but I'm desperately trying hard, and loads of us are out there, both within and without companies, saying, let's stop it, let's just speak like real human beings. And so one of my exercises with one company is when I get them to, one of their jobs is to pitch a new idea. They're creating new ideas, new products, so forth. So that these are scientists, marketers, and I say, you can't use any of those words. Just use words you might use to an 8-year-old.
Right. Use
words you use in real life. Because those words might, alignment maybe was a good thing.
Is it a sign of a bad boss, though, when they have to use these words? For example, a manager once said to me at the BBC, yes, we're going to have a meeting about your programme and ventilate new ideas, she said. And I thought, what does that mean? Well,
was she implying that you'd recently broken wind, perhaps?
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe that's the way to say it. Maybe that's excellent management, just saying it without saying it. I think, it's great to have so many words that used to be nouns that are now verbs.
Right.
So you impact a situation and so forth. The thing is, words change all the time. I despair as an ancient man when people say, I'm like hello, instead of saying, I said hello.
Yes.
However, I realise that much of what I say would have been strange to somebody from the 19th, 18th, 17th century. But yeah, if you can't say it simply and clearly, you probably shouldn't say it, or you need to go back and understand what you really are trying to say. And I feel very sorry as an outsider for people in these management positions who are having to do something that they don't necessarily feel comfortable doing.
Right.
And the inevitable thing is, why have you left the BBC? Why aren't you the Director General or whatever? And it seems a shame that the people who often are in leadership positions are the ones who may not feel comfortable doing it, but they're pretty good at what they do, and then suddenly they've got to tell other people how to do it. And one of my things is leadership is not actually telling people how to do it, but creating the environment where they can do it themselves, sort of thing.
One of my other favourites at the moment is, here's what I'd like to say. Well, why don't you just say it then?
Yes, and then to be honest, and then they lie.
Yes.
And can I give you some feedback, which means I'm going to tell you off. So lots of things like this. And it's very easy to get a laugh out of this stuff. But what I'm trying to say is actually we're all responsible. We all fall into these traps. When I first started this about 15 years ago, I went to see a big bank in Canary Wharf, and I sort of said, well, it's about improv, it's all about listening, it's how do we, talk to each other better. And they kind of, oh, no, you must understand, you must be talking about deliverables and outcomes. and deliverable. That sounds like the post office. But I have come to talk in some of those words myself, just because they'll understand it better, and also, to be very frank, they can sell it better to their boss.
Right.
So there's a conspiracy. We all know we're talking nonsense, but somehow the nonsense gets past us and will actually sometimes win the day. So I've gone a bit native sometimes. I'm writing proposals this morning. You say words that I wouldn't say to my school friends. Sometimes you've got to sort of say, well, this is what the future looks like, and the future I try and create in people's minds is, how do we work together better? How do we deal with the fact that everything's different from how it was 5 years ago, and that in 5 years it'll be different again? I'll be able to blink at you and send a tweet, presumably.
Yes.
My fridge, when I touch it, will tell me if I've got a cold coming on, when I should and shouldn't be eating. I'll be wearing some pants that tell me how my heart rate is, etc., etc. So it's going to be weird, and so I can't rely on the stuff that I used to rely on. But nevertheless, the basics of business have been around for thousands of years, which is, I trust you, you trust me. You've got something I want, and I'm prepared to pay for it or do something in return. And actually, it'd be much easier if we had some sort of sense of relationship that we'll keep doing this every week or every year or every month, and then that'll be all right. And yes, things may have to change, but the sort of basics are, how do we communicate better? How do we tell stories better? How do we get our people to be inspired as leaders? How do we get them to enjoy what they're doing? Because improv, one of our rules is, how do I make the other person look good? How do I make them enjoy it?
Right.
And that's quite unusual in business, I think.
Yeah.
And people think negotiation is, how do I get as much out of the other person as possible? Of course, in the long term, you want to have a thing where they'll come back to you time after time. And equally, in terms of, if I'm running a team, I want my team to do better than I can, or better than they would as individuals. So you try to avoid happy-clappy, but, I've just drifted into it a bit, haven't I?
Slightly. The last time we spoke, you'd got a book out called Don't Be Needy, Be Succeedy, and that was through Vaughan, your character. When you're doing these speeches for these big corporations, is it 50% you, 50% character, or is it all you or all character? How do you do it?
The other thing you might say is, how much Vaughan me? Because I created a character to be sort of all the dark side, the shadow of what I do. Right. He's the world's worst guru, really. He's full of himself. He's got no self-awareness. His home life is a mess. So I tried to put all the bad stuff into him. But of course, I learned from doing him that you can tease people quite a lot. And he actually grew out of my study of something called provocative therapy, which is an intervention which is you what they call it is, you tease the self-limiting beliefs of the client. You satirize their self-limiting beliefs. So you kind of tease them back to mental health. And so I often, in my workshops, I won't just say, here are the answers, write them down, which is what people sometimes want. You say, well, what do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? And I'll pose them a question, or I'll make a statement which I know is completely wrong. But often you get more out of that than if you say, even, what do you think? You say, well, the way to do business is to be horrid to people you don't like, isn't it? And of course, you get them responding and actually thinking, well, actually, I know some people who do that. And even one boss somebody told me about, they said, what I do is I'm trying to have it that they don't know what I'm going to be like today. I'll be horrid, and then I'll be nice. And that'll keep them on their toes. And you can't, is that really effective? Is that going to...
Yeah, you can't play games with real people's lives, can you, really?
Well, people do, yes. And we play games in our own lives. So that's why I kind of pose questions and offer absurd, solutions sometimes to get them to think, well, what am I taking for granted here? So when you said 50-50, I don't think it's 50% Vaughan, but I know that he's helped me a bit to be a bit bold in my workshops and to understand the power of gentle teasing, which is, so for example, when I often act out a day in the life of, and I did this once with a financial firm whose job was to lend money to people to build another factory or whatever. And so the salesperson, let's lend you £500,000. They go back to their office, head of risk says, oh no, that's too scary. Go back to the person. And they say, well, can you give us a bit more paperwork? Yeah, more paperwork. And they actually, I was coming at this from first principles, which is how much paperwork do I have to reduce to create the new factory? How many times do I have to go back and forth? And they said there's use as a training video now to show the danger of how complex it can become, because I'm looking after my bit, you're looking after your bit, and actually if you were able to say, I understand your bit a bit better, how can I shift myself? What's the bigger picture here? Because what we really want to do is to help this person build their factory and pay us back what we've loaned them with interest in good time. That seems to be a win-win, as we say. So I'm aware that I will drift into Elvel Spencer, but I gave him a ponytail, a beard, and a different name and a suit. So I'm hoping that people will understand that I am me. But then, who is me?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a question that could take a couple of hours to answer, really, couldn't it?
It's taken many years, many decades of my life, and we'll never know, do we, really?
No, we're all acting a bit, really, aren't we?
We're all lying to ourselves. We don't know who we really are. My son's school had a thing in their newsletter. They always have a sort of philosophical question, which is, would the world be a better place if we could read other people's thoughts? And so we thought, actually, yes and no, of course, because some thoughts I have are, should I kick that thing? Let's have some cheese now. Or, how can I make the world a better place? And all those thoughts are going on at the same time. So it's amazing we managed to maintain any sort of sense of continuity in our lives, because certainly my brain is all over the shop, as you can tell from this conversation.
Yes, and mine is. I'm currently thinking about what I should be having for me tea. I'm not even paying attention anymore.
What are you going to have for your tea?
Well, I'm thinking beans on toast this evening.
No. Have you had your lunch, surely?
No, I'm up north, you see. That's a full meal for us up north. You Londoners, I know that would only be a snack, but...
Well, yes, exactly. What about your 5 a day?
Oh, we don't worry about those in the north. We try and aim for 5 a month if we can. That's on a good month.
Right.
You know, when I look through your CV, what amazes me is that you were part of that generation of new comics that really have been the soundtrack to our comic lives of late. I mean, you mentioned Mike Myers earlier. I was going to mention that. You also bumped into people like Hugh Grant, who you work with, who were, in those days, just normal people and mates of yours. It was an extraordinary time for you, wasn't it?
Well, at the time you didn't say, I've just met Hugh Grant. Oh, I'm working with Mike Myers. You'd think, I've met this guy who's Canadian who makes me laugh. Let's see what can happen. Oh, people are laughing, that's nice. Yeah. Hugh Grant, he was slightly ahead of us, so he had an act and we were still fumbling towards open spots. And you thought, who is this guy who's rather handsome and rather well-rehearsed with his 2 rather handsome and well-rehearsed friends? And then it's funny then years, people say, you've met Hugh Grant, you've met Mike Myers. You think, well, I didn't know who they were going to become when I first met them. Yes. In hindsight, it's wonderful because it's all youth, really, because I didn't have to worry about a mortgage, I didn't have to worry about any sort of career and structure to what I was doing. It was just fantastic. I just remember the first time Mike and I were able to afford to buy a drink in one of the venues where we were performing, because we previously just would go maybe buy a tiny can of something next door and have a celebration between us. And then we got a bit more money, because it was always a door split. In hindsight, these were wonderful times. Nobody was telling us what we could and couldn't do. We had lots of energy. We would eat beans on toast if we were lucky. When you look at the pictures, you think, my goodness, you were so thin and beautiful. And now look at you. Having 5 meals a day, not just 5 fruit and veg a day. So in hindsight, yes, it was a wonderful time. Not only because of the people who went on to success, but also because of the richness of the other performers. There were mad folk who had crazy ideas, people who'd never performed before and haven't made a career out of it, but were encouraged by that wonderful flurry of activity that alternative comedy was. And I'm reading Paul Merton's autobiography at the moment, and I know a lot of the stories since I met him, obviously, but the stuff beforehand is just a guy had no encouragement at school, had no chance to show his wonderful, wonderful imagination if you read his childhood stories. School sort of grounded out of him. He went to work for the civil service, but he managed to sort of, by perseverance and focus, get to where he is. And you just wonder how many other little boys and girls have had their creativity stifled in the same way, and haven't made it to where he has. And so that was the exciting time, is that anybody could get up and do a thing. Now, I talk like an old hippie. Nowadays, it's a career. You make a choice. You might get paid within a few months. You might get taken on by management. You'll be touring. In our day, you might do the Comedy Store. You might do the Earth Exchange, which was a tiny vegetarian cafe in Highgate. Well, not even Highgate, Archway there. The rougher end of Highgate. And you might get a door split. It might be a few quid, but you more likely just get a free piece of vegetarian food. And that looks nice. It was a kind of a chocolate cake, and you ate it. It wasn't chocolate. It was carob. Carob.
What is that?
It's just not the same. I don't know what it is. It looks like chocolate, but it tastes like vengeance.
Right. Tarmac. Yeah.
It's very, very worthy. And you'd have some. I remember one guy, we did a thing in Hackney, and it was the room above a pub where normally the pigeon fanciers would gather. And we were on stage with the Port Stanley Amateur Dramatic Society. Cliff Parisi went on to EastEnders as part of them, and they were pretending to be Argentinian soldiers, not long after the Falklands War. So they were very good, but the guy running it said, some of the people who come to the show, some of them are a bit strange. Yes, I'm sure some of them are, old chap. And Mike and I were quite unusual because we put on different clothes to play the characters in sketches. We'd rehearsed, and we had an idea of making this a career. But it was wonderful to be on stage with poets and musicians who came from all sorts of backgrounds. That's what I treasure about those memories, really.
Yeah. What a stunning life and career. I think it's so fascinating what you do. And in conclusion, are we better communicators today than Neanderthal man? Something makes me wonder when I watch Towie and the people who say like at the end of every sentence and in it and phrases like that we're probably regressing slightly. Is that true, or is that just me being down on the youth of today?
Well, I would agree with you entirely, apart from the things where I disagree. So I think we can't avoid the sense, we must be heading towards something better. Evolution looks like it's getting, but evolution is probably value neutral, shall we say. So I couldn't talk to a Neanderthal man and say, do you feel better off than somebody who's working in project management for a search engine optimization organization? Who knows? We just have to accept that change is happening. I'd like to hope that people are getting killed less, but not always sure that's...
Yeah, I don't think that's what the 6 o'clock news is telling us right now, is it really?
No, but I suppose when you look at it, who wrote a book last year saying, somebody, Pinker maybe, that the world is getting less violent. But the thing is, I can walk around England, Britain, and not get killed, which perhaps my medieval forebears would have had a tougher time doing that.
Mind you, have you ever been to Worksop or Mansfield?
Do you know I have? My friend Chris England, whom you should speak to, he's got a great book out called The Fun Factory, which is a sort of fictionalization of somebody who was a music hall comedian around the same time as Stan Laurel and Charlie Chaplin. He comes from Worksop. He co-wrote An Evening with Gary Lineker, by the way. And
That'll teach him.
Worksop. And we used to have a joke that he was Worksop Man. What does Worksop Man think of this? A bit like Piltdown Man. That's a fake, of course. But, so Worksop, are you from Worksop?
No, not far, but you've got to be careful there, especially on a Saturday night. Once they get the kebabs and things like that. Hey, listen, Neil Mullarkey, he's really fascinating. Check him out on Google, put in Neil Mullarkey, and you can find out all about his conferences and, of course, his stand-up. He's still doing it up and down the country. What's your website?
Oh, well, actually, I don't do stand-up. I do improv. So the Comedy Store Players every Wednesday and Sunday. And on November the 17th, I'm doing the farewell performance of the full-length show of my alter ego, Elvon Spencer. So people should go to succeedy.com. So succeed, and then with a Y, because his show is called Don't Be Needy, Be Succeedy.
Indeed. This thing about you don't do stand-up, but you do improv, I mean, to me, it's the same skill. In fact, your skill is even better, but you're still doing it stood up, aren't you? You're not sitting down.
Well, stand-up is, I've written material, and I do the same thing night in, night out. I may ad-lib amongst it. Improv is a group work. I am acting out sketches with other people.
Right.
So I'm playing a character in a scene rather than an individual who's speaking directly to the audience.
You're still technically being a smart ass, though, aren't you? That's basically...
Maybe even more of a smart ass, yes. There is smartery and arsery going on. Yes.
Hey, listen, Neil, it's always good to talk to you. Keep in touch, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.